whole
like,
thing.
It's like the
it's like
earth.
every morning.
Yeah.
It's so silly.
But it might
Like,
take
look
us
at
a
flowers.
year.
It's like you look at it, you see all your flowers and stuff, and you just expect it to be more.
Well, my daffodils this morning were like frozen.
Oh, yeah, mine
Cattail
were
like
all
on
dripped
Tuesday.
over and
You
sad.
didn't do pretty good till well after I graduated.
Well, they got snow in Hickory.
Yeah, I saw on the radar, I was like, really
I know,
bad.
right?
My husband's like, it's snowing. I said, yeah, I don't wanna hear about it. Just, you get no sympathy from me. Yeah. Oh. Are you recording?
We are live.
Oh, we need to behave.
So welcome, and we are super, I just like to use this. This is terrible viewing, but,
If you turn the lights
we
down
are
a little bit,
super
it makes it a little easier.
casual. This is a super casual meeting, so, the slides that we have here,
Oh, that's better.
are just kind of enough structure to kind of guide us a little bit, but I thought the way we might want to start is if you could talk to someone next to you, introduce yourself if you don't know each other, which you may or may not, and then describe to your partner where you think your online students seem to struggle the most when it comes to regulating their behaviors in the course, or alternatively, and/or cognitive improvement in the course. And then what sorts of themes or commonalities do you seem to notice when you do that, when you're talking about those issues? So if you just wanna pair up with somebody and even talk about.
I'll pair up for sure.
I've
got a smile.
Oh, well, I'm happy to talk to you, cause I'm just.
Terrible.
Hey, good, how are you doing? So y'all gonna do something?
I think they just.
For self-regulation.
And you're in.
I'm gonna call this self-regulated behavior is, I believe that I don't believe that
The basement. That's where we are.
follow through like all the things that I put up there and ask them to look at.
How long have you been here?
I mean, including videos.
Pretty well involved discussion. Admit that she hadn't read it.
Oh, cool.
And they can have her eye spoon fed things. They can participate in lots of rounds. Do movie work.
I mean, there's discussion.
Because it's an assessment.
She specifically.
I read it. I agree with you. I think sometimes
So that's self-regulation, right?
I agree.
They don't have the motivation or the.
That's a change.
Yeah, the regular, motivation to actually engage in the content.
And they decide to teach after doing research in a small number of problems.
I'm not sure what she wants.
I did
No, it was.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Okay.
They were safe back home with disabilities.
Don't have time, it's fine.
So is that something they do
I do. It's a smart one, it's a sharp one.
Mama, they take rehab, several times. I did like a whole day. A really long time ago. But minimally.
I know.
I know. But that is pretty amazing. Oh, wow.
In fact, I had a guy who's going to withdraw, this semester, because he doesn't have well, he put himself in crisis, so I have some
What do you think about older grad students, traditional grad students, but definitely notice that last younger students, especially like.
I do.
They just don't know, and even if you give them a calendar sometimes, they're looking about setting post on something, trying to do this different task, and you have to be really upfront with them, right? Like, one thing I like to do is set like a video of myself at the beginning and even a navigational video.
I'm sure times are better.
Stress really early on. This is a self-paced class.
If you have like class, sit and listen, you know, that's the other thing. Like, so, instead of, I mean, I put up some videos sometimes, but they really need to, even the live class, you really need to read, and I know that some students in the live class are finding it, so mine are all grad students, that's an issue.
What,
They're frustrated and they want to.
would you have not read?
Like I have to, like I only release
When I first met
modules like 1 week.
I didn't realize that I needed to. I thought about signing somebody. I didn't realize I needed to.
Even if it's a project, you know, project.
Yeah, it is a
Talk about.
So as we think about these ideas, I'm gonna ask us, our general mic, we're recording, but it's all the way up here. And I would like for us all to be able to talk to one another at this point in a group. So could I ask everyone, you don't have to move your stuff necessarily, if you move your bodies so that we're up at this table, then it's more likely that our conversation will be caught by the mic. We did some testing, and at least the tables up close, if you're articulate, should get it. But I don't think we're gonna be on camera much. Thank you for that.
There we go.
I thought about it, but I think that table might be not easy to move. I could be wrong about that, but, hey,
Who's online? Can I ask that?
what?
Like,
No, this isn't live,
Oh, it's a
but it is
recording.
being recorded to watch later, so. So what were some commonalities that you noticed about what students struggle with in terms of regulating their behaviors or their cognitive development or improvement in the class, their learning progress?
I think Lori and I both agreed that they weren't prepared for the discussions and things online because they hadn't read the material that they should have read in preparation for it. Is that?
Okay, so some preparation. Preparation for the assignments when they come up. What else?
I think we ended up talking a lot about accountability and going back to the discussion once again, and just, you can't just kind of leave it to chance and say, okay, you know, had this conversation, you have to really, and if you post a video or whatever you're trying to get them to post on, you have to make it very clear you are getting held accountable for this, and this is how you get graded in that communication. I think that was one thing that we kind of hit on.
I think that, I mean, that's all part of self-regulation. That students just really don't seem to wanna do something unless they know there's a consequence for not doing it. And isn't that
Spoken like a
self-regulation?
behavioralist through and through.
No, I think so. It's like you ask them to do things, and
Yeah.
unless there's like a grade or something related to it, or points.
I mean, I have to give my students like points, I mean, for every little thing they do online. I mean, if if I tell you to do a reading reflection or reflection on a video, and I ask you to, react to two peers, or at least two different peers, I expect you to react to them and not just say, oh, that was a good post, or oh, that was really cool. And I have like an etiquette thing on my thing, and like, these are things you shouldn't say, or these are things, this is a better post versus a not so good post, and I give them grades for that. So,
And I don't.
Yeah. Well, but we're talking about very different levels of students here, because
We are, but
you
there's
have the
also,
graduate
I
students.
do have graduate students, but there's also an article in the, Inside Higher Ed today about, professors' experimenting with non-grading, and that the growth of the students that they were seeing as a result of not grading. So, and it was undergraduates that they were, so it doesn't have to be limited to graduate students, is all.
Okay.
We talked about maintaining focus throughout to the very end and through the summative assessment. And a lot of times they just want to get that over with because it's the end. And so we talked about how to get them to plan all the way through.
So it's, yeah, I think what came from that was that their challenges, they are not great at backwards planning for time management with these big cumulative assignments, so.
That's what we had, was that they have trouble with time management. They approach things from a weekly perspective. So if there's a larger scale project at the end, even if you clearly tell them, like, you should be working on this for the next 4 weeks, and you guide them, they still don't actually start it until week 4.
Right.
And then that's the same with the weekly assignment too. You can encourage your student to begin reading earlier in the week, but the work reflects a Sunday all-dayer.
If that, I get a Sunday late at nighter. I think concurrent with that is, and I see this across the board, undergraduate and graduate, and I increase the demands in the graduate class, my graduate classes, and there seems to be a real disconnect between the time they plan to spend on the course versus the time they should spend on the course, and that I expect them to spend on the course. So I think procrastination and time management does seem to be really
That's a
a
big
big
problem
deal.
in my world, just because I think the culture has gotten that an online class is supposed to be, I can do it all in a week, and why won't you give it to me all at once? And why is the work, and like, why is the work so much? And I mean, it's grad school.
That's, yeah, I get that, and I get that at the graduate level even more, actually, and I've said for years, they expect it to just fit in the cracks of their week, and they don't set aside, like, the 3 hours you would have been in class, plus the time you would ordinarily spend for a class outside of
Which
class.
even when I give them that math up front, they're like, what? I want to acknowledge that it's a systemic thing. I mean, we have a 60-hour program. They try to do it in 2 years because that's all they have funding for. So an online class is supposed to kind of like fit in when they're completely overwhelmed already. So, I mean, I want to acknowledge that too, because there is a systemic issue around that, but also just the idea that, this is an online class and it's supposed to be a gimme, and I don't give them.
I'm gonna switch back to an earlier topic, which is this issue about points and that sort of stuff. I think the key is whether you build relationships with kids, and they're more likely to do it because if you've got a good relationship with them, which is easier to do face-to-face than online. So I find that building the relationship online where I can get them to really buy in because they want to demonstrate to me at the way I can get them to do it in a real classroom setting that I can't get them to do. Now, most of mine is master's level too, so most of my stuff, but not all of it. And so, but I think it's that, the problem with online for me is building the relationship so that then they are it's just harder. It's harder for me to be present online in a real way than like I am in a
I
classroom.
think one of the things that helped me with that is just kind of setting myself a schedule and just know when your students you know, okay, this week they have a reading
Right.
reflection online, well, I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna have a list of my students' names and I'm gonna check off, and you know
Right.
what, I jumped into every one of those conversations,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
if it's getting to 2 students
Yeah.
a day, just
Yeah.
jumping in there and say, cause if they know I'm in that
That
conversation, they're like,
happens,
Dr.
absolutely.
Hudson's watching me.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
know they have to like
Mhm.
be talking.
So, and we will talk about solutions, sorry.
No,
We'll talk about solutions in a second, so we're kind of exploring the challenges that we have right now, but you finished your thought.
Well, I'll just say also when it's online, students think they can do anything in their life. You know, like I have 3 students this semester that are having babies.
Oh,
right
yeah.
now.
Oh, yeah.
They think they can
Really?
do anything and everything, and while I support that, I support women getting their education while they family and everything, it's just, I don't know, timing.
I think there's a
You
huge
know,
misconception about the flexibility of online, because people misinterpret what flexibility means. They think it should mean the instructor flexes to accommodate for their situation, when really it is the reverse. And so I think, cause that's a lot of, if you ask a student that's like, well, I took it because it was the flexibility. Right. Well, you weren't being very flexible. The online class is your flexibility, not my flexibility.
Right.
And so that kind of creates a tension between, and can build a barrier between those relationships being fostered, is a misunderstanding of the inflexibility. Because flexibility requires self-direction, and
Right.
if you cannot recognize some sort of mechanism to help you proceed through the materials, it's not.
So we talked a lot about the behavioral, what about like the cognitive aspects of self-regulation, the idea of reflecting on your work and seeing what you need to do to improve? I think using feedback comes into play here as well. Does anybody encounter challenges, or are they only my students that have issues with that?
It's a real.
I have to teach them in that first class that they have how to find the feedback.
Oh, yeah.
And once they have that, I've also made them then resubmit based on feedback, and then do a reflection about what they learned from that process. So once I've done that, then I don't, and that's in the very first class I have them. So after that, I don't have quite as much problem with them processing feedback, I guess. But it took me like years to realize that they weren't, I'm so stupid I am, but they weren't even accessing the feedback.
Yeah.
Or even if they
Expect
did,
it.
they just got it and said, okay, this assignment's done, and I didn't realize it
Yeah.
until in dissertations, I'm seeing the same crap that I corrected 2 years ago. And then I thought, okay, one of 2 things is gonna happen. I'm gonna stop giving them the feedback all on the way,
Yeah.
or I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it better, so that I'm not seeing the same crap in dissertations.
This is, I don't wanna badmouth any of our students, but we had a dissertation, a doctoral dissertation, who did not understand how to open up the comments section in Word. And we kept giving her the same feedback
Yeah.
over and over again, and all of a sudden, we were like, why aren't they changing this? She's not a non-compliant person, and she was really mad at us, and we were really mad at her, and it was like,
Carol, I told one of my students that I was so sick of him not fixing everything. I didn't say I'm so sick of
Yeah,
him.
right.
I said, do you need to come over to campus and let's go through this feedback line by line? I thought he would get it together, and he said, oh, that would be helpful.
My point being, sometimes we don't ask the question about,
Exactly.
is this behavior
And-
or is this a knowledge
And
issue?
he wasn't
So,
seeing it all either.
Yes,
That's when
yeah,
I
yeah.
discovered
It
I
comes down
have
to
to
skill
teach them
deficit
now.
versus performance deficit.
Right, and I think that's harder to figure out in an online class, which is happening, you know.
I have trouble with students, even grad students, making connections between what they learned in the first week of class and the second week of class and tying it all together for the end. So, you know, like the cognitive load thing.
Yes.
They understand cognitive load theory, but when it comes to application and applying that to the lesson that they're creating, that's where the disconnect happens. And so, like, well, we just talked about this last week.
Right.
And for some reason, you have to say that before the light bulb kind of goes off, like, oh yeah, we did, and I didn't do it in my lesson plan, or I did, you know. So I think just that applying what they're learning and realizing that you're going to need everything for the end product. So I don't know why they seem to struggle with that.
I think application's a problem in online classes,
Yeah.
whatever, in lots of different ways. That seeing application really happen is a challenge.
They think they can do it anytime, you know,
Yeah.
like, they don't have, all this other stuff's going on in their lives, and then they can do that too. But it's really, this is a primary part of your life if you're gonna do it right now, so.
I think part of it is, I can relate to this too from just being a student, is you do what you have to do for the week, and then you just, Chelsea said this, you forget about that. Like, that's done, I'm finished with that, now what do I have to do for this week? Instead of kind of approaching it like, holistically, this is building up to a larger knowledge base sort of thing.
I think, like, the challenge for me, like, so, this was just coming up for me as you were talking too, is that in a, an in-person class, an on-ground class, I can constantly adapt and give that feedback and know what's going on and kind of like prompt and hint
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like have a sense of like where the we're missing
Hole
each
is.
other. Whereas, you know, in an online class, it may take me 3 weeks to realize they're closing the door on each module and like not, because it's not, we're not engaging
Yeah.
in that same way. And I rely so heavily on relationships, like you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
too. You know, and so one of the things I've found is that like if students don't know me in the online class, it really helps to have a student in there who does know me, who says, oh, hey, no, if you're confused, like, just show up at our office and go see her and stuff like that. But like, I rely so heavily on those relationships and assessing some of that stuff like you're talking about in class, like, oh, this connection isn't being made. And it's so much easier in a face-to-face situation where it's like this constant assessment process of what's sinking in, what's not sinking in, and when they're doing it online, it's more like, oh yeah, okay, we just finished multicultural career, okay, done.
Yeah.
You know, and like, oh wait, I was supposed to like remember that and address it in my group project? Like, what is that about? Like, but in a classroom environment, that thread would probably be more easy to see throughout,
Right.
you know, and more present. I don't know. There's just some
No, I think
reactions
that's-
to what you were saying.
That's true. It's like the informal assessment part you don't have the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
It comes back to what Tina was saying too, about how every little thing you have to put points on it, and as soon as you do that, it's work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to do those quick little formative things that you can, when you have a captive audience in a classroom, force on them. Like they have to do it, they're there. But in an online environment, you just created another assignment for them to do, and they'll hold that against you,
Yeah.
I feel.
And they
So
might
it's-
not,
it's
like, in the,
challenging.
excuse me, yeah, in the class, so you might say, jot down, you know, such and such, what you know about
Yeah.
whatever. And so you can get that real quick and then share. On the online, since, you know, they come on and off at different times, then it's hard to.
Right.
And
Right,
it's,
yeah,
get that.
and it's a weekly
Any
assignment
kind of
then,
tally,
you
yeah.
know?
Any kind of
Especially if they're done, you know?
Yes.
I already got a
Did it,
discussion
yeah.
and I already talked to, you know, about 2 different people's, you know, responses. I'm done.
I didn't think about what you just said though. I mean, in face-to-face, you can have a ticket out the door and then
Mhm.
collect those. It doesn't seem like another assignment. It's, and then you can get that feedback quick and that, but if you do something like that online, it is work. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, it's because if they're sitting in your classroom, they just assume they're gonna have to work, and then when they walk in an online class, it's like,
They don't.
they don't account for that time, yeah.
Everything you do is
Huh.
listed.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
the expectations, exactly, you know what you have to do.
Yeah, and you know, it's true, and I know that's how we're supposed to build these courses, but in all honesty, you know, I'm doing something that I'm breaking some of those rules because I just feel like I can't get done what needs to be done. And yeah, I do give them all, but I'll throw something in there every now and then. And yeah, if nobody tells me anything, nobody tells me anything, but it doesn't hurt to ask, you know, and usually I can get 2 or 3 people to give me some kind of quick informal feedback about something. But, you know, it's more work on me, but, well, it's probably not than teaching a face-to-face class, but I don't, and I've kind of not let them see everything and like, so that they can't pace too fast.
Yeah,
I just don't do that, and I put it open when I'm ready.
Locked and
Yeah.
closed dates.
Which
So-
slows them down a little bit, I think, in terms of getting so disconnected from the content.
Put more time into it
I'm-
too, probably.
I'm an advocate of the idea that learning requires time.
Yes, exactly,
Right.
exactly.
So what are so coming back to the behavioral stuff, the time management, the, I'm already, oh, here, I'm right. Lack of organization.
You're on that.
Thank goodness I wrote notes down, cause I need my own self-regulation adaptations. And backwards planning and things like that. What are some supports we can put in place in an online environment now that we've clarified that it's not as easy to do necessarily as in an on-ground environment? What are some things we could maybe do, or what are you doing to assist your students with these sorts of challenges? They're not, if there was a panacea out there, one of us would be rich and not doing this job anymore, but maybe collectively, some of these ideas could be helpful for each other and for anybody else who gets to listen to this later.
I think probably, I think a lot of people already do this, but just kind of a really good navigational video at the very beginning of the class and, you know, requiring them again to watch it. You know, maybe before they go into something else, they have to watch that first week navigational video. And I think for me, a mistake I've made in the past is assuming they're gonna know, you know, where everything is. You know, even if it's, you know, students, you know, who probably done D2L for a while. I mean, just like we were saying, not knowing where to access the feedback. You know, if you've given a grade or something and you publish feedback and you post it back to the D2L Dropbox, you know, they may not know how to go in there and get that, but just literally demonstrating to them, how do you go in and get your feedback to read it?
And professors use different stuff, you know, so I have my favorite
Right.
things,
Right.
and I may never do X, Y, and Z
Right.
because it doesn't work for me. But they're used to X, Y, and Z, and now they're, so I think you should assume, because you've been doing a bunch of online classes, that you know the unique things.
And what I do is when I first grade the first round of things, and I let the class know by an email, and I tell them exactly how to access their feedback at that point. So they're not trying to remember it, because there are multiple ways that I give
Right.
feedback depending on the assignment, so there are different places they're gonna find stuff.
And I think your point of, yes, you said it in the navigational thing, but say it again when you're talking about that thing, because that's when they're gonna learn it, is when they need it, not when they, you know, you gotta give them the big picture in the navigational thing, but I think you then have to prompt them, to help them keep.
I think something too that's helped me is really, and this is in the MOUs and stuff that we do, just making sure that, like, if you've got, like, say, week 1 module, and you say, okay, this is the study guide for quiz 2, have a link to study guide quiz 2, instead of just assuming.
Yes.
Because, I mean, I know students nowadays, and I think there's even some research behind this, that if you get past so many clicks, they're gonna stop.
Right.
So, I mean, if you could just make it one click, here's the click to study guide 2, here's the click to quiz 2, and they can just get there, you know, just making things easily accessible to them and quicker, because our students do work in a very immediate culture and environment of getting things. So I think that kind of helps too. It takes you longer to build that, but I think in the long run, it saves you a lot of headache, you know, from students asking a lot of questions like, where's this, or where's that?
So there's like 5 ways to
So-
get to one thing on
Right,
D2L.
right.
Except for the rubrics. In order for the student to see the rubrics, they have to
a lot
go
of
into
trouble.
the assessment rubric or
And click
wherever.
on
You
the
can't do a hot link to it.
But
I
in the
wish I
grade
could.
book, they have click to see rubric if you've associated it with a grade item, so, but they have to
You
click
can't put
on
that in
it
the
to see
checklist,
Never
it.
there, yeah.
And you have to remind them to do that.
For like helping students kind of learn to tie things in together, this is new in the MOU, but I've been trying to do it in my class, is sort of providing more narrative than I was used to. So even just at the beginning of each module, I couple of sentences that say, this module covers this, and this is how this ties back into what we did last week. Just laying out really clearly how things connect. And I did not have that before. That's something that I just had never done. I just assumed that they were able to make those connections, and so now I'm starting to see that they're not. And so they need it to be blatantly said, this is how this relates to this. And it does take more preparation, but you know.
I would much rather say, tell me how this relates.
Oh, well, me too. Yeah, definitely.
I'm working on integrating more of that, and we've looked at it whenever you help me look at my stuff, but just like up at the top and kind of, I tell them like in order to do the things that are there, I tell them, you know, watch the video first, or do the reading and then watch the video and then do the quiz, and, or, you know, whatever it is, or if there's more than one. Like sometimes I have a lecture video, but there's also like a TED Talk that I want them to watch or something like that. And so I give them an order, I tell them like the objectives for the week, which has been a lot of work on me up front, but it also helps me stay organized and stay focused, because I can get real excited. I can go down the TED Talk black hole like, real easy, and I'm like, they should watch these 45 TED Talks because clearly they're going to get really smart if they do that. And after watching the 45 TED Talks myself, I'm just behind. But like it helps me keep focused, because then I can go back to my objectives and be like, all right, Emily, this doesn't really fit with your objectives.
All they actually need to watch is Brené Brown.
Well, we're in counseling. They all watch Brené Brown. So, but yeah, I mean, like that's really helped me.
Oh, yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah. So that's helped me a lot.
I wonder if, and I'm not
And
doing
helped
this
them, I
right
think.
now, but I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a bad idea, and I may survey my students voluntarily, of course, at this point, about the time that they're spending on certain things, and then in the syllabus, providing time estimates and clarifying that this comes from prior students who have already done this. It's an average of their, you know, time estimates, so that you can plan ahead for time.
We had a
Because
talk
they're
about,
spending like 5 hours on things. I was like, I would have thought an hour and a half. So, excuse me.
we worked with College of Med last week on this kind of thing, just because their students have some issues approaching just the volume of material that they're presented with. I mean, I can't imagine, because my brain shuts down. Like if I see a certain number in D2L of content topics, I'm immediately overwhelmed. And but we talked a lot about time estimates and the pros and cons of giving a time estimate, because I feel like it's a double-edged sword, because for your over and middle achieving students, meeting that time, they're like, oh, okay, it's almost seen as a race. But for maybe my underachievers or people who may struggle, they reach that time and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Am I not getting it? Does it have like a negative impact? And so we talked a lot about,
I would encourage, we're doing a research study, Stephanie and I, on some behavioral economics in the classroom, and Colin Chesley too. But one of the things we're talking about in terms of currency is students' time as a currency for them. And and there's that loss aversion. So if you've lost time by giving it to this assignment, that could be resented. So I think if you're gonna give a time estimate, you err on the high end, and then they haven't lost that time. And that is somewhat manipulative, but I do think we're always manipulating. That's what we're talking about today. How do we manipulate our students? So I don't think it harms them, as long as it's still in the range of reasonable time estimate, to err on the high end rather than even the average on those ranges that you get. Maybe that's the part of the solution, because I think you're absolutely right. And those students who struggle to do things and take longer are going to end up being the ones that are disgruntled.
I've started a couple semesters ago. I was tired of telling students like what they needed to know to start the class, or time preparation and stuff. So I decided to be a little bit manipulative and let them tell each other. So the last assignment that they have in the class is to reflect on the class and what what advice they would give to the next group of students coming in. And they always will say, I wish I would have spent more time. I wish I would have taken advantage of the optional face-to-face conferences, or I wish I would have set up a WebEx time to go through my paper. So just for me, for other students, and that's what I start the class with, is like, hey, here are some tips of how to be successful from previous students. And hands down, they always say, I wish I would have allocated more time for specifically this assignment because it was a beast. So there's a little bit of fear involved because they know it's ahead of them, but I think a little bit of fear is not a bad thing. And it's not coming from me, it's coming from someone else who wishes, you know, it just seems more approachable to a student coming in, I think, for whatever reason. It's a psychology thing, I'm sure.
Have you seen
It's all a
students
psychology
be able to
thing.
use that then? Like, have some reflected that they use that, or?
Well, they all, even the ones who come in will still say, I know I was told that I should have spent more time, but I still should have spent even more time. The overachieving students, I think, take heed to it real early, and they're afraid they're not going to be as successful because of it. But they still have the issue. Like, it still hasn't solved it. It's just made it come from someone else besides me, I guess.
Stephanie, when I was an elementary school counselor at 5th and 6th grade school, one of my assignments was for our 5th grade students to give advice to upcoming 4th graders. And the way I worded it was, what advice would you give to a 4th grader coming to City Park? And an autistic kid wrote, tell them to go back to Brookwood with their lives. Because I didn't say rising 5th graders.
Right. That's so funny. It shows you how students think that. That's so funny.
But it also shows you how careful you have to be when you write things
Yeah.
too. Which is, I'm never like, oh, did I say that right?
So I got frustrated with my undergraduates and because I was giving feedback that wasn't being followed, and I think I was being pretty clear about where it was located. And these were for iterative assignments, so they were gonna do the same kind of assignment again,
Right.
Yeah.
and they were going to then I noticed they were making the same errors again, and nothing irks me more than spending time giving feedback that isn't even accessed or utilized. So I started doing something for my undergraduates, especially because I think I don't think they're ever taught to do this, frankly. I think a lot of times they're not. I call them flight plans, and I put them in assessments for 5 points, but it's untimed. And the questions generally they're open-ended questions. What was the feedback you got in your own words? Do not copy and paste it. And I don't actually remember what I told them, but usually when they tell me back, I'm like, yeah, that is what I said. So I don't print it all out and try to check that for accuracy really carefully, but it usually rings a bell. And then the next question, because I think they honestly do not realize, some of them don't realize this is the next question they should ask themselves is, so what are you going to change the next time you do this type of assignment? And I have them actually lay that out. That should be a no-brainer, but I think sometimes they aren't thinking that way. And then I usually have them talk about because I give exams to my undergrads, what study skills did you use and how did they work? And what new study strategy are you going to attempt? I give them a list of effective ways to study. And so they aren't shooting blind on that. They can just go to that list, and I always have in that question, I have a link to the document for study strategies, so they can go right there and look and say, I think I'm gonna try this. And they're so candid, it's so funny. They're like, well, I highlighted and I reread, that didn't work so well. This time I'm gonna try talking to my roommate about it. And then the next time they're like, I said I was gonna try talking to my roommate, but I didn't really do that. I just went, and it didn't work so well. They're so funny. They're really honest. I'm surprised at how honest they are in that, but at least I'm getting them in the habit of thinking about the process of studying and learning. And it's not that is perfect for all the research on intention versus follow-through behavior says. There's a big gap there, but at least I've I've raised their awareness, I hope, a little bit for that. I don't see that need for my graduate students as much, but I could be making an incorrect assumption there.
Sorry, I have to go, I have to do some work too.
Show up late.
I wish.
Bye.
So we've got, making sure they have links, and reminders about where to get information about the class, and I think feedback was in there as well. What other ideas do you all use, or things do you use to try to get your students' attention?
I break down things, and actually, it's, you know, in my reading class, there's a big assignment. They learn about these assessments all during the semester, and then they have a big project due at the end. And it's big, and they have to incorporate, depending on the kid they're assessing, they have to incorporate different kinds of assessments. And they asked me to break it down. And so, like, I asked them, you know, if this applies to your student, and they have to give 3 assessments. So if this assessment applies to your student, this week turn in, you know, your results and some recommendations for programming. And then at the end, they can apply that to the big project. So
Okay, so they do it a little bit at
they
a
do
time.
it a little at a
Mhm.
time. Ask them to turn it, I ask them to turn it in, and then give them some feedback on that. But then again, hopefully they'll take that feedback and apply it in the end project.
I think that's really helpful. That I had not taught that educational psychology course, so I didn't live in the world where they tackled the whole lesson plan at one time. But chunking it out seemed very manageable this semester, so when they only had to do pieces of it at a time, it was a lot more thorough, I think, than if they would have taken a stab at it all as holistic. Yeah.
Which is what we were doing until this semester.
So I didn't get to see that, but I do know that breaking it into steps, I got a lot more thorough, thoughtful responses in each section, which I think was probably really helpful for students. So.
Is anybody having their students self-assess their work?
I did do that, but
I've done that in the past, but.
they're not super
I
honest.
remember that wasn't a very good.
They're not honest doing it live either. I have them use a rubric to check each other, and they're like, check, 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 check.
Great
Look at us,
job.
like, oh, we didn't even address this. Yeah, too nice to each other.
They don't. I think that's a lot of it too. They don't want to be mean to their peers or be the bully who brings up that you didn't do something well or.
I have them assess how well they did upon just a reading, and then how well they did upon using a tool of some sort with the reading. So.
It's an optional assignment. I've only had one pair of students take me up on it this semester, but they have to write just a lesson activity, not a whole plan, and then they switch them, and their partner finds like 1 or 2 reasons why it's a really good plan based on theory or research, and they outline all of that. But then they have to make one suggestion based on theory or research that improves the lesson. So it doesn't, and that because that's an expectation they both make for each other, I think it doesn't break them down, also because they've already said what's good about it, what's strong about it. And then they switch it back and they have to have a reflection on what their partner said. And I think the one I got was really good, but again, it's optional for something I'm doing in the class, so maybe that's a way to ensure some kind of peer feedback on that process.
Also with assignments, I have them I approve topics right from the start, so they'll start thinking about it. So I ask for approvals from the very beginning. So they'll be thinking about it throughout the course.
I have two experiments going on in both of my classes right now. One of them is going okay, one of them isn't.
That's okay.
But in my capstone class, I'm trying to gamify the whole thing because I felt like they have to have the 20-page paper and everybody freaks out about that. So I've tried to incorporate gamification elements in partnership with the Writing Center. And that's kind of blown up because I don't agree with the Writing Center's feedback.
That would be a challenge then.
So that was tough for me
Especially for international students.
that was really tough to learn. I wasn't anticipating that because I thought, well, the more eyes I can get on their paper, blah, blah, blah. But then because I had the requirement to get the points was to make an appointment and then send me their transcript because it's all online. And so it's this weird portal thing, and they have to, I want to see that they're not just faking it or lying. But that was really hard because I don't know how to handle it now.
Yeah.
Because I like, one student in particular, I was like, I actually want you to forget everything you just.
Yeah.
Was it that the content was wrong, or just, or it was writing?
Yeah, it was just mechanics. It was just mechanics.
The Oxford comma every time.
The what?
Oxford comma.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a list of picky rules that my student, it's like 46 picky rules, and I know that I go overboard
46
on
picky rules.
But
She's
yeah.
totally not kidding,
I'm
Kim.
not kidding.
I'm not
I'm
surprised,
so-
actually.
I'm not surprised. But no, they're not major deals, and most of them are like
Common grammar.
they're
There,
very
there.
common. Like
Yeah.
a paragraph must have 5 sentences.
Yeah.
Your paper must have a title. Like these
Yeah,
are
those
things.
are pretty obvious.
Yeah. So I would say only like 12 of them are like, oh man. But anyways, you can't use this is, there is, there are, like just general things like that. So, so the writing person gave all picky rule violation, and I just couldn't deal with it. So we're gonna have to rethink that. But the other thing that I'm trying to do along with topics is I teach composition, and that is very frustrating, very irritating class to teach online. I've had to take away all of their options.
Like the English composition?
Yeah, just writing, just
The
English
general
101.
core
Mhm.
composition. Oh,
When you
that's
say
fine.
take away all.
Well, they're no longer allowed to pick their topics.
Oh.
They're no longer allowed to pick the topics. So and I teach this at a community college, and so it's just a particular group of students, rural Appalachian students, typically first generation, non-traditional, all this. So all of their assignments for this semester, I've tried to do like that whole culturally responsive teaching practice. So every single assignment is Appalachian related. It ties in at some way to some sort of cultural value, cultural event, cultural practice, whatever. And it's been, that one I feel like has been hugely successful because I don't have to read about abortion or animal tasting or gun
Right.
control or capital punishment or, you know, those things. But my students really have enjoyed, at least I feel like they've enjoyed the work because it feels less laborious to grade than the other topics. But I think my students were overwhelmed. A lot of my students, because their first semester, they are too overwhelmed with choice. If I give them too many open-ended things, I spend a good deal of my time helping pare that down to something more manageable. And so if I've eliminated choice, then yes, the course is less flexible, but I think that it's more manageable for them because they're not having to pick something.
Well, I think it's true for the international students that I deal with is that it's so big and they have so many things they're trying to figure out at one time, and you want me to understand what here and make a decision.
Yeah.
And so I do leave choice, but only where I think it really matters that they have choice. You know, not where not as much as I would normally say, you can pick this or this. No, we're gonna do it this way this time. Yeah, we'll do it the other way the next time. But then they get choice about some topics and that sort of thing. Because I think they're right. They're just processing so much stuff and trying to learn D2L and real English and that's American English now. Y'all know I'm talking about American Southern English instead of Queen's English, which is what they speak. And I'm like, what?
I like to fake them into thinking that they have a little bit more choice. So,
Yeah.
for the theories class, I was bored to tears with that theories class, and I thought, I don't know what is possible to do with this that's not gonna make it just awful for me as an instructor and for them. But they have a choice. So, there are 7 formats that they have to cover over the course of the semester. But I don't care which week you choose to do a study guide, which week you choose a PowerPoint, which week you choose the research part. It doesn't matter to me because the content in itself, I mean, they're gonna have to know the content. So I don't care which week you do what, which week you do your video, as long as you cover all 7 formats over the course of the semester. And then what I found for them is they're able to allocate time according to their personal schedule as to, oh, I know how to do PowerPoint, so I'm gonna do that this week because I'm busy. Or I'll do that later on this semester. But for me, grading them, I would much rather grade 2 videos, 2 PowerPoints, 2 research papers, and they're spread out than 30 all at once.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I like it.
Mentally good for you too.
Yeah, I don't think it works for every class, but
No,
for
but it
just
can
like a
certainly put it
content-heavy
in,
class
yeah.
that there's not a lot of, yeah.
Close to ending our time. Do you have any last thoughts? Or last ideas you wanna toss out?
I think this was a good idea.
I think, I was gonna say, I think it's a great idea to get together and talk. Of course, it's fun. It is.
This will grow.
I do too. What's the next one? There's another.
There isn't a next one for this semester. I don't think we planned another one.
Okay.
This was testing the waters, just to
Okay.
kind of see. And I think I'm gonna call it a success. I think we have a list of good ideas for future topics, so we're not just kind of regurgitating the same things every time necessarily. But we probably are gonna be a little busy in May, beginning of May. And then a lot of people are gone for the summer, so we will probably resume these, I'm thinking maybe a couple per term, fall and spring. Seems to be about the right pace for our busy schedules and so forth, but it's good to have a good place to brainstorm and share ideas, so
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah.
All right, see you.